Alright, welcome everyone, and here's the setup for this episode. We are in Haravilliers, a small town 50 kilometers northwest of central Paris. It's January 10th, 1998. A man, let's call him Mr. D, or even shorter MD, is driving with 4 others through the French countryside before dawn. The air is crisp, the stars are sharp, and then, suddenly, a massive, silent craft appears above them. No sound, no vibration, just an enormous, hovering structure radiating colored lights that illuminate absolutely nothing. MD, a seasoned aeronautical technician, takes in every detail. He's got the eye for it. And then, just as they pass beneath the thing, everything cuts out. The next thing they know, the car is 1.2 kilometers away, still moving, still running. 4 people, completely blacked out. No memory of what happened in between. At first, it seems like just a case of missing time, until MD starts remembering. And what comes back is nothing short of terrifying. While his passengers were unconscious, he wasn't just sitting in that car. He was somewhere else. This account, compiled by Gérard Deforge, affiliate of the International Bank of Ufological Data, documents an event unlike any other, a case that stands out for its detailed observations, physical after-effects, and the disturbing memories that would surface. The principal witness got in touch with the database after finding its contact information in a specialized magazine. Mr. D, or MD, only came across this magazine after his encounter. During those events, he was both a privileged witness and, in some ways, a victim. The 3 others seemed less affected, though their testimonies remained crucial. Before this incident, the witness had no particular interest in this type of publication and viewed stories of the supernatural with detachment, something he had only ever heard about through vague accounts. He had never engaged in any research or activity related to these occurrences, despite the fact that 2 members of his own family had previously witnessed UAP-related events. Before we can make sense of what happened, we need to know who MD was as a person. MD was described as a man with a commanding presence and quiet elegance. In his professional life, he had been a senior aeronautical technician, trusted with highly specialized and sensitive work. During his career, he had held high security clearance and was responsible for organizing the protection of strategic French military command sites, including facilities at Taverny, which are connected to nuclear and other military operations. Along with other socially prominent friends, he regularly gathered for hunting in the woods of Haravilliers in the Val d'Oise region. By the time he met investigator Gérard Deforge, he was a devoted grandfather, living a peaceful and comfortable life, spending his time with his family. More than anything, he just wanted to be left alone. He knew that talking about what happened could attract unwanted attention from investigators and from people he had no interest in dealing with. And yet, on that day, he sat down with Deforge, ready to break his silence. What happened to him was so intense that keeping such an experience bottled up forever was incredibly difficult. But talking about it wasn't any easier, especially after a painful attempt to open up to people who were supposed to listen with care and professionalism, such as doctors. A confidentiality agreement was made. The names of the witnesses would not be revealed, as they all held positions of great responsibility in their respective fields. Deforge gave his word that he would only publish the account under his own name. Later, Deforge would emphasize that MD believed sharing his experience might contribute to science and help humanity understand these unexplained events. All in all, MD had written 40 pages of personal notes, documenting the strange manifestations that continued long after the initial encounter, though he made it clear that those pages were for himself. "You'll get my account exactly as I remember it," he told Deforge. "Then we can go over the details." They agreed on a process. MD would tell his story in his own way, Deforge would ask questions, and before anything was made public, MD would have the chance to review the final report. Over 8 hours of interviews, mostly at MD's home, he walked Deforge through everything that had happened. These sessions took place on March 5th, May 13th, and May 21st, 1998, with the deputy editor of the Gazette du Val d'Oise sitting in for part of the second meeting. Now let's go over the evidence gathered from those sessions. It is January 10th, 1998. MD has been invited to a hunting gathering at a place called Le Ruelle. Le Ruelle is a small hamlet within Haravilliers. The exact meeting point is a parking area at La Guibarderie. It is early morning, still dark outside. MD is driving a metallic gray Peugeot 306 slowly along Rue de Terre Saint-Denis, accompanied by two others. One passenger is a friend described as psychologically fragile, who would later suffer a complete breakdown after that day. The other is JCG, a former military engineer who once worked on a missile base before changing careers to run a carpentry business, employing 13 people. Following behind is a Citroën Xantia, driven by JM, a civil engineer specializing in tunnel construction. He is traveling alone with his hunting dog, also heading toward the hunting rendezvous. At the same time, their friend MK is approaching the parking lot at La Guibarderie in a white turbo diesel Mercedes. The air is crisp, the stars shine brilliantly, and there isn't the slightest trace of mist anywhere. The cars continue northwest toward the parking lot. After driving a few more meters in that direction, the cars suddenly face a brightly lit area appearing above the horizon. The sight is so surreal and astonishing that no one speaks. They all remain silent, fixated on this overwhelming display of light right in front of them. MD feels an odd sensation. He has the unsettling impression that this phenomenon is somehow meant for him, as if it is directed at him in some inexplicable way. He continues toward this unbelievable sight. Directly ahead, the object remains motionless, allowing him to observe it in extraordinary detail. An enormous, unbelievable thing. Thanks to his technical background, he instinctively registers a series of details. The colors being emitted, the shape of what appear to be powerful floodlights, which he estimates to be about 5 meters by 3 meters, similar to those used in stadiums. But strangely, these lights, though vivid and intense, illuminate nothing. Other details about its shape and dimensions also stand out. Only 3 colors are visible: green, red, and yellow. And then, the realization strikes. It is going to pass right over them. That much is certain. But no, he keeps driving, heading straight toward the enormous object which remains completely still. Now he can make out even more details. Everything is so sharp and clear. The moment arrives when his car is about to pass beneath it. In fact, his vehicle reaches the edge of the disc, allowing him to observe it in great detail from the left side of his car. MD has a strong impression that this massive craft must weigh several thousand tons. This thing is essentially parked. It appears to be running at minimum power, just enough to stay in a stationary position. His car engine keeps running, but for a brief moment, a flood of intense sensations rushes through his mind. He feels a strange sadness in the presence of this eerie, grayish object. The object hovers just 10 meters above the ground, about 3 stories high, the witness estimates. A bizarre sensation overtakes him. His mind feels empty. His thoughts vanish. His reflexes slow. He describes himself as feeling like a hollow shell. An uncontrollable, irresistible curiosity compels him to lower his driver's side window for a better view of the underside of the object. At that moment, despite lacking any visible lighting, apart from perhaps faint reflections from the few streetlights along the road, the craft reveals itself with astonishing clarity. It's as if the object is subtly illuminated from the outside, making every detail visible. Like 2 other passengers in the vehicle, he sees a round shape, which, by cross-referencing different visual markers, he later estimates to be about 45 meters in diameter. A truly massive object, weighing thousands of tons by his estimation. Leaning out of the open window, MD gets a view of the underside, a flat gray surface, regularly dotted with dark openings, each about a meter wide. Later, after comparing observations with other witnesses, he realizes that these holes might be the source of powerful beams of light. To the witness in the Mercedes parked up the road, it would look like the lights were part of how the object moved, maybe its engine or propulsion system. Near the center, there was something like an upside-down, 8-sided turret sticking out about a meter from the craft. Even though it was still night, the whole thing was surprisingly clear and easy to see. At the center of this slightly lighter gray octagon, there was a large, hollow circular area with a diameter of about 6 meters. MD thought immediately. This was no exhaust nozzle. Despite the positioning that might suggest otherwise, he is certain. This perfectly circular excavation in which he sees nothing is some sort of door. There is no noise, no vibration in the air. An extraordinary stillness. He can no longer even hear the engine of his car running, and more than ever, that deep sense of sadness seems to emanate from the object and its immediate surroundings. The car continues moving forward, slowly, headlights on. Nothing happens. Then, at that exact moment, as the edge of the flying disc hovers directly above their vehicle, all 4 occupants of the car suddenly lose consciousness. In that instant, their awareness is completely shut down. No one, absolutely no one, remembers anything. At some point, the witness regains consciousness. About 3 minutes have passed. He remembers nothing. He feels as though 3 minutes have gone by, but there is no proof. Now, however, he knows exactly where he is. He knows this route perfectly. He knows the distances exactly. And this leads him to a troubling realization. He has just experienced what is commonly called missing time. He finds himself at the entrance of the well-known parking lot where he is supposed to meet his friend. The car is perfectly aligned on the road, the engine is running, but the object has completely vanished. The 4 occupants have regained consciousness. Somehow their cars have traveled 1.2 kilometers. How? A mystery, complete incomprehension even to this day. One thing, however, is absolutely clear to the witness. He had not been in control of the car. He had lost consciousness. He felt completely drained. But what exactly happened? The car eventually pulls into the designated parking lot for the meeting. Waiting quietly in the parking lot is their friend MK, parked separately in his Mercedes with a sunroof. MK was at the time an aviation inspector for Dassault and a former F-100 pilot. This man had no need for stories to occupy his time. He divided his life between his professional duties and caring for his disabled wife. Now MK described how something incredible had transpired. A massive object had flown over him as well. He had arrived at the parking around 7:15 in the morning. Sitting in his car, suddenly, he heard a soft whooshing of air overhead. It was such a deep and impressive sound that I will never be able to forget it, he later explained. Drops of light, in green, red, and yellow, falling in parallel beams down onto his car and onto himself. The lights passed directly through his transparent sunroof, surrounding him completely. The beams continued down, striking the hood of his car, where they formed bright patches of light. Each was rounded, with sharp, clear edges, about the size of apples. Yet their exact shapes remained strangely undefined. MK went on to describe the underside of the object. It looked like strands of Christmas tree garlands, glowing and colorful. The beams of light beneath the object converged onto the ground, completely bathing his car in their glow. For a brief moment, his vehicle was illuminated by all 3 colors at once. This was a strong indication that the lights were distinct and did not blend together. He never got out of his car. Instead, he watched as the object dove down from the sky, circular in shape and at least 40 meters in diameter. He described the descent as like a black curtain dropping. It was so sudden and heavy that for a moment, he thought to himself, "It is going to crash." But just as quickly, the thought faded, and he found himself no longer thinking about it at all. He had witnessed the full luminous display of the phenomenon. His description matched what the others had seen. By estimating the height based on nearby trees, he calculated that the object had passed about 20 meters above him. Unlike MD, MK did not experience any strange emotions. After hearing what his friend went through, MD contrasted it with his own experience. He too didn't have any clear thoughts, just a strange emptiness, as if his mind had been wiped clean. All he felt was a vague sense that his friend had been flown over by accident, as though the phenomenon had no real intention behind it. Deforge noted that this key witness had yet to be interviewed, but based on the events so far, everything appeared to support MD's initial impressions. Following the strange event, the friends quickly rejoined the group of 25 they had planned to meet. Strangely, none of them said a word about what had just happened, as if the moment had passed without leaving a trace, or as if it had never quite settled into reality. Had they seen anything? Will anyone ever know? One thing was certain. Everyone was back together, carrying on as if nothing unusual had occurred. MD only fully snapped out of his mental fog around 9:15 a.m. But one question haunted him. Why? Why hadn't he thought to stop? He scolded himself for not pulling over to get a better look at the strange craft. By noon, the entire group had moved on. The morning's events seemed to vanish from conversation, swept aside by a catered meal and casual discussions. The usual hunting trip chatter resumed, and not a single person brought up what they had seen earlier. At that moment, it was as if they had simply forgotten everything. And of all the strange things that troubled MD, this was the hardest to shake. So the rest of January 10th unfolded like any other. Just a hunting trip among friends, like many they had shared before. MD eventually realized that he needed time to make sense of everything before he could talk about it. He had made a deliberate effort to hold on to the details, especially his sense of time. But what unsettled him the most was exactly that, the feeling that time itself had warped or vanished. In the days after January 10th, MD developed severe eye irritation, but couldn't say exactly when it started. He eventually saw an ophthalmologist who asked if he had any idea what might have caused it. MD gave an innocuous explanation, suggesting it could be radiation exposure from medical equipment at work. The doctor advised him to bring it up with his employer, but MD explained that he no longer worked there and that whatever had affected him must have come from somewhere else. Seeing the doctor's doubtful expression, he dropped the subject. All he wanted was to recover. The doctor prescribed cortisone eye drops, but even now, whenever MD runs out, the pain returns. His vision, however, does not seem to have been affected by the radiation. To his credit, the doctor agreed to sign a medical certificate at MD's request. The way it was worded gave solid confirmation of his claims about the injuries. Another physical effect occurred. A brownish mark appeared on his left cheekbone at the same time as the burning sensation in his eyes. MD immediately thought that if he hadn't leaned his head outside the car window to get a better look at the thing, he wouldn't have been burned. He is convinced that he was the only one affected because the others were protected by the Faraday cage effect of the vehicles. Deforge noted that the mark on MD's face caused no pain or discomfort and had been fading gradually. When he observed it himself, it was still clearly visible, about 10 centimeters wide. However, the physical effects had slowly given way to something even more unsettling, psychological and intellectual changes that MD struggled to make sense of. MD described himself as a reserved and quiet man, someone who never felt much need to talk or share his thoughts. But after the event, his family, especially his son, noticed a dramatic shift. He had become more talkative, expressive, and eager to share his thoughts. At times, his son hardly recognized him and would gently scold him for seeming like a different person. On an intellectual level, Deforge observed that MD seemed deeply troubled by what was happening to him. It took him a long time to admit it, but he no longer understood his own thoughts. For a man who had always been grounded in logic and certainty, this was unsettling. At one point, looking at Deforge with an anxious expression, MD simply said, "They are rude, but not too mean." At first, this statement made no sense, but it became clearer when he began explaining how his way of thinking had changed. At times, he seemed to be improvising thoughts without fully processing them, blurting out phrases he didn't know what to make of. As a result, he started doubting himself. To me, this was a clear sign of psychological disturbance, Deforge wrote. What he seemed to be experiencing was a disruption in his ability to organize his thoughts. It was as if some kind of shock wave had scrambled his reasoning process. He admitted to me that before the event, he never watched television, or at least very rarely. But now, He finds himself watching science programs, not because he enjoys them, but because he finds them oddly intriguing. Then, while we were casually chatting about random topics, he suddenly dropped a scientific reference into the conversation. "Do you know about tachyons?" he asked me. Deforge replied that he was far from being an expert, but as far as he could recall, tachyons were subatomic particles that had only recently been detected in cyclotrons. However, he did not remember their exact properties. "Well," MD told us, "it seems that tachyons are indeed particles, but their defining characteristic is that they can move faster than the speed of light." Then he added, "The universe is truly structured according to a binary logic. Everything operates under the rule of more or less. For example, what I saw this phenomenon, I perceive it as an expression of something negative. Cold lights, sadness, the dark color of the vessel, silence. As for that vessel, let's talk about it again. When it flew over me, when it stole those 3 missing minutes from my life, maybe they implanted some kind of electronic microchip in my brain. And now, I am absolutely certain of its function. It was only in the past few days that I came to this realization. I kept trying to figure out what had happened to me, what was going on, and suddenly, it all made sense. So let me act as a bridge between them and me. It is a system that allows them to inject thoughts into me, thoughts that were never my own, and that is why I find them rude. But not too mean, because if they had wanted to harm us, they would have taken whatever they wanted right then and there. They were the force, and they had already paralyzed us. Another thing about the vessel, whenever I think about it, there is this face, though it is not really a face that seems burned into my mind, almost permanently. It is a shape, an image of a knight, and I have drawn it for you with all the details as I remember them. These beings were inside the vessel. That is how I see them. Maybe one day I will find the strength to give my consent to real specialists, people I trust, so they can help me uncover what really happened during those 3 minutes, perhaps through hypnosis regression. You see, in my mind, these entities move around, but they themselves are empty, lifeless. They were being controlled to carry out a specific task. Their eyes, I see them as hollow. The night figure, I see it as dark, like everything else. Everything is metal, artificial, without soul or consciousness. What struck me the most was this row of teeth, but they weren't actually teeth. They were plates, evenly spaced apart by a thin groove, with a horizontal separator. It was a device, and it was completely white. A machine for communication, perhaps emitting sounds or waves, I don't know. It seemed like something that could vibrate to transmit signals, to communicate. The sight of this row of teeth, fully extended, made me deeply uncomfortable. That's all I can say. I wish I had seen it take off, to witness its immense power in action, the sheer force of its energy. So, after a month, I started to pull myself together. I wanted to verify what I had seen. First, I tried to draw it. I hold myself to a high standard, and I was never satisfied with my sketches. So I looked up professional illustrators in the yellow pages, searching for artists in my area, near Grésy-le-Plâtre. I called an artist in Grésy-le-Plâtre, but he clearly didn't take me seriously. So I quickly realized that no one was going to take me seriously. I decided I would have to figure this out on my own. I needed to document exactly what I had seen. Every detail was burned into my memory. To make sure my drawings were accurate, I took a drawing course until I was satisfied with my representations. I'll show you the results of that work. But I didn't stop there. I started researching. I bought specialized magazines. That is actually how I ended up contacting your organization. I also conducted other verifications. I called the Gendarmerie and Marines, the control tower at Cormeilles-en-Vexin airfield, the Gendarmerie in Pontoise, the one in Auvers-sur-Oise, and the town halls of Grésy and Haravilliers. According to them, no one had seen or heard anything about this event. But then I came across an interesting detail. So here is an additional anecdote of note that I uncovered. When mapping out the flight path of the craft, I realized that it had passed directly over the clock tower of Haravilliers Town Hall. So I asked someone at the town hall if they had noticed anything. Here is what the mayor himself told me. I have a habit that I never break. I am always up early. By 6 a.m., without fail, I am awake every single day. No exceptions. Every morning at 7 a.m., I open the shutters in my bedroom. I am always awake by then, every single day without exception. But on January 10th, I have no idea what happened. I slept like a log, and it was the worst possible day for that, because I had an important meeting 9:45 a.m. at the town hall that morning. I nearly arrived late. That is exactly what they told me, so maybe this craft had some kind of effect on the witnesses. That is deeply unsettling. I can't tell you much more. You already know almost as much as I do at this point, MD told Deforge. I'm going on vacation soon. I need to rest. I understand that you want to verify certain things. This is not an ordinary case. I know the other witnesses have had difficulties meeting with you, but please, I insist, respect their anonymity. I live a quiet life, and I want to keep it that way. If my name gets out, they will never leave me alone. It's impossible otherwise. Deforge gave his word. The International Bank of Ufological Data will honor its promise, but we will continue our investigations independently. The press may be informed, as well as any authorities or research organizations that could help push this investigation forward. This work is critical for all of humanity. By May 13th, the issues with his eyes had almost completely resolved, and the brown mark on his left cheekbone had nearly disappeared. On Monday, April 20th, after several days of strange symptoms, MD, with the help of his wife, lanced a large boil on his hip. This left a small crater about 1 centimeter wide. As they manipulated the boil, they heard a strange cracking sound, which startled them both. At the bottom of the wound, they found a small foreign object, roughly the size of a large grain of rice, which was expelled. That same day, and ever since, MD noticed that the foreign thoughts that had been regularly troubling him had almost completely disappeared. He made a connection between the two events, but of course, could not be certain. He would later say, "What I saw, for me, was something that came from nowhere and returned to nothingness." On the morning of May 21st, MD called Deforge requesting to meet that same day. His voice carried a sense of urgency, and he insisted on speaking in person. They arranged to meet at 2:30 p.m. at MD's home, where they talked for about 3 hours. MD started by saying his eye irritation had come back, just like before. He seemed concerned, but it was clear that this was not the only reason he had called. For the first time, he revealed details he had not been able to share before. It appeared to him that during the period of unconsciousness in the car, while everyone else had blacked out, he had experienced something different. He described it as a complete distortion of time, where everything around him became utterly still, as if frozen. It was not simply darkness or nothingness. He felt removed from his surroundings, as though he had entered a different dimension of time itself. At some point, he found himself lying on a table. To his right, he saw the helmeted figure, who seemed to be standing alone beside him. Then something even stranger happened. Letters began forming in his mind, almost as if they were being placed there deliberately. They seemed to shape both the figure and the helmet it wore. Weeks later, on April 20th, a word suddenly surfaced in his memory: TOBO. At the time, it meant nothing to him. But on May 19th, while discussing these strange recollections with his wife, she pointed out something chilling. TOBO was an anagram of robot. Much later, MD also remembered fragments of the conversation. The robot with the helmet apparently made a reference to the Mobius strip. It spoke to him about a polarity inversion and said, "We are great travelers of space. We travel at speeds faster than light, thanks to tachyons." It also mentioned 2 lives in 1, a parallel life, and added, "There will be something else, apocalypse, catastrophe." And it doesn't end there. MD would come to reveal that he now remembered being taken on a journey at extremely high speed through space. He described the sensation of being ripped from the earth with the craft, experiencing unimaginable velocities, and even circling the moon. For a brief moment, he found himself transferred aboard an enormous mothership, far larger than the first vessel. There, he saw extraordinary beings. They were towering figures approximately 2 meters tall, with bird-like or gallinaceous heads draped in large cloaks. What struck him most was the backward-jointed knees, exactly like those of gallinaceous birds, particularly noticeable in the structure of their legs. He described the creature as having an absolutely fantastic head, like the head of an eagle with a nose, either a pronounced beak or a hooked nose. Slowly, his gaze rose until it reached the head of this being, which stood more than 2 meters tall. The creature's head was striking, with deep royal blue eyes that he compared to those of a golden eagle. The beak was prominent, and the eyes were extremely piercing with rectangular pupils. There was also a crest with 3 distinct protrusions. He described the skin color as flesh-toned, adding that the vision was completely surreal. At that moment, MD felt he was facing the true leaders, while the helmeted robots he had first encountered were nothing more than simple executors. MD also spoke about a lasting effect from this experience, something he only realized with time. His vision had changed. When he looked at the night sky, it felt as though his gaze traveled much farther than before, as if he were seeing deeper into space than he should. The moon appeared sharper than ever, almost unnaturally crisp, and distant objects seemed clearer in a way he could not explain. His perception of space itself had shifted. MD was not alone in having to slowly come to terms with the experience. The other witnesses appeared strangely numb and detached following the incident. However, when carefully questioned, they seemed able to retrieve specific memories, as if the details surfaced only under direct prompting. This pattern suggested a psychological blockage or partial suppression of the experience, with fragments of memory accessible but not fully integrated. For example, J.M., the civil engineer driving the Citroën Xantia, initially dismissed the luminous mass as a cloud, but later admitted during a conversation with Jacques Vallée that he could not explain how he arrived at the parking lot with no memory of driving. Similarly, JCG, seated in the Peugeot 306 with MD, recalled seeing the craft's illuminated panels only when asked directly, describing them as resembling a telephone relay tower, a detail that surfaced only under questioning. While LDLN issue number 349 was going to press, a new testimony unexpectedly became part of the case, seemingly by chance. Gérard Deforge had entered the office of a company responsible for servicing the photocopier at his school when he met a representative he had never seen before. As it happened, the man was also a town councilman in Haravilliers. During their conversation, the councilman learned about the ongoing investigation and revealed something remarkable. He lived directly under the flight path of the object on January 10th, 1998. He remembered the date with certainty because, by coincidence, it was also his birthday. Each year, around 7:30 in the morning, he marked the occasion quietly at home. That was precisely the same time MD and his friends experienced the phenomenon that morning. This conversation led to the discovery of another unsettling detail involving his 2-year-old daughter. Beginning the night of January 11th, just one day after the incident, and continuing for several months, the little girl suffered from intense night terrors. Every night, she woke up screaming and hitting the walls with her small fists. The episodes were so severe that both parents had to stay by her side every night to calm her. Eventually, they sought medical help, and a doctor prescribed sedatives. One detail stood out. Before the incident, the child loved playing with an electronical toy that projected colored lights onto the ceiling. After the onset of her night terrors, she refused to go near it. If the toy was turned on in the dark, she immediately showed signs of extreme fear and distress, very similar to her nighttime episodes. The investigators suggested a simple test. They gave her a coloring sheet filled with neutral shapes, along with 2 unusual drawings related to the case. However, the girl showed no particular reaction. Even so, her story would go on to become one of the most emotionally unsettling parts of the Haravilliers case, especially as more inexplicable events continued to follow her.
Vous aviez quel âge à l'époque?
J'avais 2 ans.
2 ans. Donc toute petite. Est-ce que vous vous souvenez de ce qui s'est passé? Parce que moi, je ne me souviens pas de mes 2 ans, par exemple. J'ai juste quelques bribes de souvenirs, mais ils sont rares. Est-ce que vous vous souvenez, vous, de cette période-là et de ce qui s'est passé?
J'ai un souvenir. Je peux pas. J'ai l'interdiction en fait interne. Je sens que j'ai pas le droit d'en parler. C'est vrai que du coup, ma mère m'en a énormément parlé pendant très longtemps, en me demandant mais qu'est-ce qui te l'interdit? Et je ne sais pas ce qui me l'interdit. Mais je sens qu'à l'intérieur, il y a quelque chose qui m'interdit d'en parler.
C'est plus fort que vous, en fait, c'est ça?
C'est plus fort. En fait, je peux parler de certaines choses, mais je peux pas dire ce que j'ai vu.
C'est comme s'il y avait une instruction, c'est ça? Une sorte de...
Oui, pour l'instant, je ne peux pas le faire. Ouais. Je ne peux pas le faire. Je me rappelle d'un son, je me rappelle de ce que j'ai vu.
Nearly 1 year after the events of January 10th, MD returned to the hunting grounds where the encounter had taken place. It was January 9th, 1999. As on the previous occasion, he had come for a hunting meeting with his companions. Upon arriving, he parked his car near the same location, the small parking area by the hunting lodge. As he stepped out of his vehicle, he was suddenly overcome by a strange sensation. MD described feeling an invisible force pushing him, causing him to lose balance and fall heavily to the ground. The fall was violent enough that his metal cigar case, carried in his pocket, struck his ribs upon impact. The pain was significant, and MD later required medical attention for the injury. Reflecting on the incident, MD became convinced that this was a deliberate warning, a physical message directed at him. Since the original encounter, he had associated smoking with the disturbing foul odor he linked to the craft, describing it as the UFO smell, reminiscent of rot or decay. He interpreted this fall as a clear sign ordering him to stop smoking. However, MD resisted what he perceived as this imposed directive. He openly challenged it, declaring that he would continue to smoke and refuse any external control over his actions. So what do we make of the Haravilliers case? A man with no prior interest in UFOs experiences a massive, structured craft hovering over his car, loses time, and later recalls an encounter with a helmeted humanoid. He develops physical symptoms, intrusive thoughts, and a lasting change in how he perceives distance and clarity when looking at the night sky. Even decades later, this case has never been officially debunked. No rational explanation has been widely accepted, and unlike other famous UAP incidents, it has not been the subject of serious public skepticism or high-profile investigations. That leaves us with a question. Was this just an anomaly, a shared illusion, or something that defies all conventional understanding? How could multiple people across multiple locations be so deeply affected? Whatever happened in Haravilliers on that cold January morning, one thing is certain. MD was never the same again. Thanks for watching Stories Lost. We'd be thrilled if you subscribed, left a comment, or gave us a like. And we'd also like to take a moment to welcome our new channel members. And say thank you for the coffee. And of course, send a big thank you to our ongoing supporters as well. See you all next week.